All right, so what we're going to do this week is we are going to actually cover labs 6 through 8. So labs 6, 7, and 8 are kind of a big kind of chunk that all kind of go together, which you'll find out in lab 8. There's a whole troubleshooting section on how to fix issues that may have happened anywhere between lab 6 or 7. And I know that many people had some confusion with lab 6, so we're going to talk a lot about that as well, because lab 6 is one of those that tend to be on the list. And hopefully, because I will start grading again tonight, hopefully a lot of you saw my comments on your initial submission of lab 6 and have fixed a lot of those mistakes. But we're going to go over it anyways, because I feel like there's a couple topics that maybe I didn't cover very well. So we're going to go over those, and we're going to kind of just work all the way back up through lab 6, 7, and 8. And lab 8 is actually the easiest of the three, so no worries there. And in fact, when this class first started, labs 6, 7, and 8 were actually all a single lab, and you just had 3 weeks to do it. And then they decided to split it all up because, most of the time you'd put off the work until week 8, and then you'd have a lot to do. So they decided to split it up into 3 labs. But the good news is that lab 8 is really pretty easy. So we're going to cover that at the very end. So if you're all good, everything's working fine, lab 6 and 7, please be patient. And hopefully you maybe learn something maybe along the way, or just reinforce your understanding. So anyways, we're gonna get started here. And I've talked a lot about lab 6 in our teams discussions and various things. So I'm not gonna go over any of these in detail. I just want to talk about the misconcepts, and then also a few of the common issues that I've seen along the way. So the first one being is our library files here. You can see that I am calling my library files, and this will clean up everything. It means it drops everything, it recreates it, it fills it all up with the precede and seeding script. So that's all good. And so what I've done here actually to kind of help do this. So one of the biggest things I found is troubleshooting. I feel like I need to help you see how to troubleshoot just a little bit better. So that way, if there is an error in your log file, you know where to go. Because I realize, wow, I haven't really shown too much of that. So that's what we're going to do this week. And just to show you, I've actually broken my lab 6, so we can kind of see some different errors. And these errors were actually probably one of the more common ones. So I've broken my lab 6. So that we can go over it, and along the way we'll also talk a little bit about some of these missing concepts. So just for housekeeping, one of the first mistakes that were made was actually in the check constraint when you create your price table, and to be fair, that one was kind of it was a new concept. So just when you create a constraint, a check constraint means that basically it's going to check a certain condition. And in this case, it's going to check that active flag is in Y or no. It's in a list. So just like we would normally put something in a where clause, we could say select everything from price where active flag in Y, no in a list, and it would do it. So that was probably one of the first things that I noticed was this check constraint. Many people left off this, and they just put the Y and N in there. But just so you know, you write it like any conditional, so you need to say the column is in Y, N. So yeah, that one's right there. The other very common one is many people missed creating their sequence, which isn't a huge deal. But when we go to insert into price, you're going to want it. So make sure you have that check constraint. But other than that, those were kind of like the real easy ones. And now we're going to kind of get started into where I started seeing a lot of the commonalities show up. And the first one is when we insert rows into item. And so I wanted to show you this. So here's my broken one. And you'll see that we have an error here because I broke it on purpose. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. But when we insert into a table, you can choose to list out all the columns, or you don't have to. And in this case, you can see that I am not listing out all of the column names above this. I just go straight to values. That's fine. That just means I'm inserting into every row in the database. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at this and kind of go through it, because the other thing that a lot of people seem to get confused on was these sequences. And so when we're inserting into a table, this is where we get to decide what the data is going to be. So you can see in this case, I'm inserting into item, and we only want to use the sequences where there's numbers. And specifically, we kind of made our sequences to help us keep track of primary keys. And in this case, item ID, which is the first column in our table, is our primary key. So we're going to use the sequence to auto increment that, because it really has no substantial, we just need the next available ID, which is sequential number. So we're going to use our sequence to pull that for us, so we don't have to try to figure out what it is. And we don't want this to be hard coded necessarily, so we're going to use that sequence, and it will just get the next available value. However, there's many cases where we want data to be hard coded in whatever we want to put in here. So in this case, for my whatever this is, I've hard coded a string, which is our item barcode. So this is actually our barcode, which is just a made up number for now. But you'll notice that I hard coded that, meaning that's the actual string that I put in that column. And then the third kind of thing we do is subqueries. And subqueries is one thing that I feel like a lot of people just didn't quite get based on what I saw from Lab 6. So I really wanted to hit subqueries pretty hard. And the nice thing is the subqueries, I think once you get them, are actually pretty easy, because we wrote a lot of select statements in our previous labs. Basically labs 1 through 4 were all just about writing select statements. And so basically what we're doing here, just like, if I wanted to put the name of the movie in here, I put single quotes around Tron. Well, in the case when we have our common lookup table, a common lookup table is going to hold common values for us. And these are common values that we have to make it so we don't mess something up. You can imagine what it would be like, take telephone for example. Let's say your boss says, hey, I need everybody's work telephone number. And so you would start writing a select statement. You'd say select, and this obviously ain't going to be perfect, but you could select a telephone number from telephone where telephone type. Let's say that we just hard coded this in there. Let's say we didn't use a common lookup table. This is kind of how it would be kind of right now if we didn't use a common lookup table. We would have home there. But this has a lot of implications, because when we actually use this application in its entirety, and it's kind of hard right now because we only see the back end. But that's what makes databases kind of a little bit complicated, and you have to really be thorough, because you kind of have to think this all the way down the line when you're designing this database. But when we're using the web interface, let's pretend it's a web app, and people get to add a telephone number, most of the time you see these little drop downs, right, that say, oh, home, work, cell, whatever. And so what common lookup does is it provides values to put in that drop down. And without that drop down, you have people that can hand type it. So let's say that there was an empty box, and I deal with this all the time because, I, as a database administrator, there's a lot of data clerks in our organization that input data. And whenever you have like a plain box, and luckily our newer systems don't have as much, but we had an old system where, they kind of got to put in whatever they wanted. So let's say that the telephone type, you would have to, my queries would start to look like this. Let's just take a copy of this. To make it work, they would start to get really to be quite crazy, because instead of just having it equal to one value, I would have to go like this. I would say home, 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 all sorts of crazy stuff. But, just to keep things simple, you can kind of see how that would get crazy just to look for a home. And so what common lookup does, it kind of is in the name, is it's a common lookup place to hold different things. You can see another scenario if we were to write a where clause, like if we want a credit card type, is equal to Visa, you know, that could turn into in Visa, because you can imagine all the different way. See, and I just made a typo. So then all of a sudden you have to account for typos or clean it up. It basically just makes your data super messy. And so we want to avoid that at all costs. So what we've done is we said, hey, look, here's this table that has all the possible combinations. So in our case, if we were looking for the telephone number, I could say select everything, and we'll just look at everything now from common lookup, where common lookup context is equal to, and I may have already, let's see if, yep, I've already ran my lab 6. We'll use the new way. So we'll say where common lookup table is equal to telephone, and common lookup column is equal to telephone type. Oh man, why did I put that there? There we go. And so now we could see all the different possibilities that we would put in our drop down on the web application. We would have home and work, and when they select that from the drop down, it's going to put the common lookup ID that's associated to those, so that way there's no mistake. Now the only downside to using a design like this is now we have to have subqueries when we pull our data, because all the data isn't in the telephone table. And that's kind of what we're doing here. So we're going to take a look. Let me open up that log file. lab6.txt. Let's take a open this. So now if we take a look at our log file here, where I try to insert the tables here, you'll notice that I get this error. And it says integrity constraint, and it gives the name of the constraint, which is the FK item 3, violated, parent key not found. And you know, we can go look at where we inserted this, but basically what we're looking at is our foreign key was violated, and it actually has to do with our system user. And you'll notice here that I'm not actually, because I wrote this a while ago, I'm not actually using the subqueries to pull a system user. But we can change that really fast. In fact, let's write our subquery since we're talking about subqueries. So in this case, you'll notice here I have 3 sysdate, 3 sysdate. Just to make this a little bit easier to see, we're going to do this. And this 3 is actually referring to system user. So let's take a look at system user. So if we take a look at system user, it's referring to our system user ID. And you'll notice that I don't have a 3 in here. So that's where it's saying the parent key is not found, because it's looking through 1001, 1002. Oh, there's no 3. And so what we need to do is we need to change this. Now we could just go in here and say 1000, what would it be? 1001 here, and now this would work, this specific part. But to make things cleaner, because we don't want to have to look it up, we can use, because you know most people aren't going to remember the number of an ID, especially if you have like a million rows in your table. You're not going to be able to remember a number, but it is pretty easy to remember sysadmin or DBA1. In this case, we're going to use sysadmin. So we could say select system user ID from system user, where system username is equal to sysadmin. Right, and we can put that there. Now the cool thing about subqueries is they are just select statements. And I mean, I'm going to put a caveat here. Most of the time, you can actually just take and write this all by itself and run it, and it will actually give you the result you're looking for. So this is essentially the equivalent of just putting a 1. Now we don't know that, and we don't really want to know that, because we're going to use a subquery, which means that even if it changes, as long as we have a system user named sysadmin, it's going to work. So I'm going to go ahead and replace these 3s with this subquery. And then we will rerun this and see how our log file changes. Let's give it a save. And away she goes. Now let's take a look at this and let's reload our text file here. And now you can see that we're getting one row created. And what we've done is we've created a movie called Tron, and we have all this different information here. Now, one of the most, well, we'll talk about it here in a minute. So we get our items inserted and everything's fine. I'll show you another one of the more common things coming up. So then we come into the Harry Potter, and this is where most people actually did really fairly good here. In fact, I didn't really see any problems hardly at all. The only thing that I wanted to bring up is our Ginny, or Lily, I mean, sorry. When you insert into Lily, many people forgot to put her middle name or put her middle name with the first name column, which we don't want because later on in labs, it's either 9 or 10, I believe it's 9. In lab 9, we're actually going to need her middle name in the middle name column to make that work. So yeah, and I'm running really quick just to fix this. So you'll notice that all through here, I have the same problem where this one actually works because it uses 1, but all these with the number 2 is a problem. So I'm actually going to use find and replace. I'm just going to really quick replace our 2, comma 2, sysdate, comma 2, sysdate. And we are going to replace that with comma 1, just to make this quick, comma 1, sysdate. And there we go. Let's save that. Go back here, do another little rerun. And now we get our people. And like I said, we want to make sure that Lily has her middle name separated from her first name. And that should be pretty simple. If you need to, you just add the middle name, because I think a lot of people copied from the create or the lib folder the inserts, which I told you to do, which is fantastic. But on her specifically, you have to add the column because a lot of people, we didn't have a middle name in there for them. So we want to make sure we do that. All right, and then let's look here through our log file. I believe we did fine up until we did this. Okay. And I really should have kept that up there. Let's pull this back up. All right, and so we insert our Potters, and they're all in there. So this is probably one of the biggest mistakes, that commonalities that I saw. A lot of people on their subqueries here. So when you insert, so you do your rental, and then you insert your movies in for the different people. And Harry rents 2 movies and everyone else rents 1. But a lot of people had their stuff here, but the information was wrong. So when we're trying to actually choose the item that we're inserting, we have to use this subquery. And I'm going to take and copy this. And this is a good practice. If you ever have a subquery and you want to test it, just take and paste it into your terminal and run it all by itself, and it'll tell you exactly what you're looking for. So in this case, I'm looking for Star Wars 1: The Phantom Menace, and it pulls it. So let's say I was going to look for Tron, right? I want to insert Tron, and in fact, let's just go ahead and cut this out. If I was looking for Tron, if we wanted to reverse engineer this and write this from scratch, what's the method that we would use? Well, we're looking for the item ID of Tron. So let's select everything from item. And, what I like to do is, because you're kind of you know kind of what movie you're looking for. So we're going to say where item title is like, and we're going to put a %, and we're going to say Tron. All right, so here is our Tron data. So I'm going to kind of keep this handy because this is actually what we're going to use to pull this data. Now, there are a variety of ways that you could use to pull the item information using a subquery. You could use the barcode if you wanted, and all that kind of stuff. And you'll notice that up here, you know, they use the subtitle. And I think this is where a lot of people kind of got stuck, confused, or whatever. Because you know all the inserts in the lib folder use a subquery very similar to this, but all you need to do when you're writing a subquery is guarantee that you're only going to pull the one row that you want when you're writing a subquery that's expected to pull one row. So in this case, since we're trying to insert one value into a single column, we only want it to pull one row. So that's all you have to do is make sure that it's only going to pull that one record. And so in this case, surprisingly, I could actually use this specific query I just wrote here to do this. The only thing I'd have to change, the only thing I'd have to change is that instead of selecting everything, I would just want to select the item ID. Now this is actually a pretty terrible subquery because you never want to use a fuzzy search, so to speak. But we're going to kind of do it just to show kind of how this would work. Let's fix that. Here we go. All right, so we got around there. Let's reload, and now you can see that we're created here. So you can see right here it says one row created. That worked because our subquery pulled the one row and the one row we were looking for. Now, one of the more common things that I saw is, you know, you would put the name in here. So you'd say where item title is equal to Tron, and that would work all by itself. But then they would try to keep it in line with kind of what was there in the example. And so you'd say where item title is equal to Tron and item subtitle is equal to, and if it didn't have a subtitle, let's take a look at our stuff here again. This does have a subtitle. It's the 20th anniversary collection. A lot of people would either put that or wouldn't spell it right, or they'd leave it empty like this, hoping that it would just ignore it, which is not true, because this will actually look for anything where the item subtitle is empty string, which is different from null also, which was another mistake. So now you'll notice I get no rows selected. So we actually either want to put the information there to match, or it can't be there at all. So in this case, you know, I would actually just probably take and copy this if I wanted to, and then we would pull our results. On those ones with the you know, and they do their little join to common lookup to get the movie type, because let's say you had Star Wars 1 Phantom Menace in DVD and you had a copy on Blu-ray. You know, those would be two separate items, and so if you just had the title and the subtitle, then obviously it would be not good. And so basically you just want to make sure that your subquery can pull one row, and in this case we actually don't have two copies of the same movie, so you're okay just to put the item title and subtitle in there if you want. Another solution would be you could actually just put the barcode of the movie, or however you want. We just got to make sure that we pull one value at the time it's written. So that was one of the more common things that I saw, and that's how you fix it. And hopefully, does that help with subqueries just a little bit, because basically what we're doing is we're just writing a query to pull a value for us, so we don't have to look it up and hard type it. Because ultimately, you know, we could come in here and we could just delete this and then say 1022. Oops. And now I am not in insert mode. I could delete this and we could just say 1022, and this would actually have the same result. But then if we ever add another movie, you know, it puts everything off balance if it ever gets messed up. So we write the subquery so that no matter what order movies are inserted in and that kind of thing, it will always pull it. If they get deleted and re-added, you know, it's not going to be an issue. Okay. I believe. Oh, and then common lookup. Those actually, most people did really good on our common lookup changes. The only thing else that I saw is people kind of got a little confused when we go to insert our data into common lookup for telephone. In fact, a lot of people actually kind of just miss that step. And so you have to insert, because we move everything over. In fact, I don't think I have the instructions up, but if we select everything from common lookup, if you remember right, we move everything over, and common lookup used to have a multiple that was shared between address and telephone, because we have a home address, a work address, a telephone home, and a telephone work. And we wanted to separate those. And so what we did is we made address, we took multiple and we made it into address. But that means that now if you were to try to look it up, you'd have to say, you know, telephone would be linking to common lookup address home. And we didn't want that. So we needed to insert some new rows into common lookup to support home and work for telephone type. And here you can see, I'll just show you this. We insert into common lookup the values, common lookup sequence for our common lookup ID. And this, I just put an X because we're actually getting rid of our common lookup context column. And you can actually see here, if I were to just, not there, if I were to describe common lookup, because I've ran my lab 6, it actually wouldn't have common lookup context. And so because it doesn't matter, you can put whatever you want in that column, but it has to be there right now because it's a required field. So that was the other mistake, is you know, we need to insert something there to make the insert statement work. So I just put a little X because we're getting rid of it anyways, and then put it in there. Also, the other very common mistake is that case matters. And in our common lookup table, we want to kind of keep everything uniform. And just so you know, the reason why we uppercase like table names and column names inside of common lookup is because that's the way it actually is in our data dictionary. So like if I were to select everything from user tables, you'll notice that in here there is a lot of uppercase values. And in fact, let's select table name from user tables. So here is our data dictionary. And the data dictionary is the database, and it's kind of inception because it's a database of a database. But this is actually all of our tables that's owned by us as the user, and you'll notice that they're uppercase. And so the reason why we store our table names and column names in common lookup is uppercase is because that's kind of the standard in Oracle, is that the table names are all uppercase when they're stored in the data dictionary. Because this is actually pulling directly from the data dictionary, and you can see that they're uppercase. So that's why we kind of do it to match, because if we ever needed to do something trickery, we could. And it just is uniform. So make sure you use proper case. The other thing that we uppercase is the type. And then the description is kind of the pretty one that's, you know, more formatted how us humans like to read, I guess you could say. And then I think that was it for the most part. We talked a lot about a lot of the other stuff in my meeting for week 6. If you have any issues with migrating that data, I actually almost do the whole thing for you in the week 6 video. So go take a look at that. And then all we have to do after we get all the data migrated in Common Lookup, we just have to update telephone. So it doesn't point to address home, it points to telephone home. And we use a subquery for that as well. And that is pretty much lab 6. And I'm going to real quick make sure that I didn't break anything too bad. Nope, it looks like we're good. So my lab 6 is actually looking pretty good. Does anyone have any questions? Because what I'd really like to do is, if you have a problem with lab 6, if you're stuck somewhere that you don't think you can solve after this, feel free to speak up now, and we can, because if there is an example out there, I think it would be helpful to everybody. So is there anyone who is stuck somewhere that maybe I haven't talked about, or you feel like is still a little confusing for you? It's awfully quiet.
None for me.
I have one.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry. Should we go back and change our system users to, instead of a hard-coded one, change them to the subqueries then?
It's up to you. If you want to, you can. If not, it's fine. You'll notice that a lot of mine still use the hard-coded values. And for the who audit columns, that is okay. I would prefer, like when you're doing your insert in, like on this case, try not to just look up what it is and type it in, you know, just to get that practice in. But on the who audit columns, I'm always okay if you just put one sysdate, because it does get very tedious, you know, having to type that all out every time. So, so yeah, that's fine.
Okay, thanks.
All right. So if something comes up, let me know on lab 6. But for now, we are going to move on. And I actually haven't graded your lab 7 yet. So does anyone have any questions about lab 7? I did want to talk a little bit just about how they all kind of go together. But lab 7, I feel like for the most part was a little bit easier than lab 6, or it should be the same. After you figure it out, it should be okay. Is there anyone who's stuck on lab 7?
So I have something. So the only thing that I was really stuck on, and I submitted it knowingly that I was stuck on it, just so that I could have something to turn in. I still get the column equals 0 in the step 3, I believe.
Yes.
I still get the column is 0, but I still get the row count is 13. So I'm not entirely sure what it is that I did.
Okay. So one of the more common, this one's actually pretty common. And to help you, this is actually perfect. I'm glad you brought this up, because I saw a lot of people in Teams bring this up. And so to kind of help walk us through the troubleshooting and the fix, we're going to actually reverse engineer this little piece of code. So what this does is basically, as you know, we built these rows in Common Lookup for a 1-day, 3-day, and 5-day rental. And then what we do is this step actually takes and it updates all of our existing rows. Because if we were to look in rental into our rental item, if we were to look in our rental item table, you know, we have a return date and a checkout date. But what we want to know is how long they rented that movie for. You know, when they came up to the counter and you said, oh, how long do you want it? They say 1 day, 2 day, 3 day, or 1 day, 3 day, or 5 day. You know, we want to determine that. And so basically what we're going to do is we're going to examine those dates and then figure out what the proper value is to put there from common lookup to refer to this 1, 3, and 5. So what this does is it, like I said, it subtracts the dates, which should always equal 1, 3, or 5 based on our data. And then it pulls from the common lookup code. You'll notice right here, it says where common lookup code is equal to the return date minus checkout date. So basically, one of the most common things is missed because we added this new column called common lookup code in lab 6, I believe. In fact, let's take a look real quick. Oh, no wonder I can't find it. Let's describe common lookup, and I'm just going to see because I've ran my lab 6. So yeah, you'll notice that we have this common lookup code here, and that common lookup code is where we should put our 1, 3, and 5. Because if we pull up the instructions for lab 7, when we insert into rental item type, it's price type, and 3 new rows, you'll notice that it has this code here. And this is probably one of the most like missed things because it's new. We've never really inserted into here before. It's not a not null column, meaning that it can be empty and you're not going to get any errors. But this code is very important because that is what's going to determine when we run this when we run this script, where that is. So the first thing I would say is check to make sure that you have your 1, 3, and 5 in your code column on common lookup, because that's probably the number one thing, because that's pretty much what it uses. And then the other thing that's pretty common is to make sure that when you inserted those, that your rental item and rental item type are uppercase, because really what it comes down to is we just have to make sure that our data matches what the script is going to do. So in this case, we need to make sure our common lookup table is uppercase rental item type, and then we want to make sure our code is 1, 3, and 5. Now, once you do that, if you're still having issues, then we have an issue with our return date and checkout date. But in that case, you should be at least getting 10 of the 13 or whatever it turns out to be. But my bet is that common lookup code is probably missing. And in fact, let's run this. Apply. And then let's select distinct common lookup code from common lookup. You know, here I can see my 1, 3, and 5. And in fact, let's add common lookup table to this. Let's put it at the beginning though. So this is what I would do is I would run this query here. I would say, you know, let's see what the lookup table is and the code. And now we can see, and you know, and let's order that just to make it easy on ourselves. Order by 1, 2. And so here we can see that a lot of the common lookup code is empty, but for price, we have 1, 3, and 5. And for rental item, we have 1, 3, and 5. Also a good time to check your price to make sure it's a Y and a no for common lookup code, because we'll use that eventually as well. So yeah, that's how I'd go about fixing that. Hopefully that helps a little bit. If you want to take a look at that and let me know, we can fix it if that doesn't do it. But that should be the bet right there.
Yeah, I just ran that same query and I did not get anything in the common lookup code. So thank you.
Yep. So just go up to that step. I think it's step 2 in lab 7. And just add common lookup code to your insert and put the hard code value in there. And it is in quotes, so you'll put 1 in quotes. But yeah, then it should work. Great question. And I think actually the from what I've seen in Teams, that's kind of the only thing I've seen. And you know, we really walked through step 4 pretty heavily. And really those are the only 2 kind of get stuck points in lab 7. So we're going to move on again, unless someone else has a question. But if you come up with a question, come across something, just let me know, and we'll go from there.
I have a really quick question. It's not about the lab, it's about the console. So when we start doing this, we go into like lab 6 or lab 7. And if we want to go back to run like lab 6 to rerun it, don't we have to go back to lab 6 lab?
Yeah, so pretty much you have to be, so there's a few different things. When we launch SQL Plus, you know, if you see this SQL prompt right here, we are living inside wherever we launch that from. You know, basically that's where we set up shop for the time being. Now, because we're there, we can get to other places, but we have to tell the computer how to get there. Because we can run, you know, apply Oracle Lab 6 right here because I am in the Lab 6 directory, and so it knows, it looks right there. But for example, if I wanted to run Lab 7 like I just did, but I'm in Lab 6, I have to tell it how to get there. And there's a few different ways to do that. You can use absolute path, home, student, data, you know, so on and so forth. We've seen this 500,000 times. And you can give the full file path. Or you can actually tell it the relative path, you know, relative being I know where I'm at so I can get there. So for example, here I am in SQL Plus. I know that if I just go back one directory and then into Lab 7, there's the file I want to run. So we can actually do that in the command. So to go back one directory, I use period, and then Lab 7, and then I just tell it the file name I want to run. Apply Oracle Lab 7.SQL. And then I run that, and it finds it, and all's great. So,
Thank you.
Yep, no problem. The only caveat to that is you're going to get your log file created, because my Lab 6 calls, in your should too, it calls my lab, you know, whatever labs it calls. It's going to create, so if I open up my Lab 6, I now have my Apply Oracle Lab 7, my Apply Lab 7 Oracle log file in here. So wherever you run that from, that's where it's also going to create those log files, which isn't a big deal, but just something to be aware of.
Okay, thanks. So
Yep.
the other way to do it without that issue is just to do exit, re-enter.
Yep, you could just type exit and then CD, you know, go into Lab 7 and SQL Plus. Just like that. So whichever way you prefer, I usually just run the executable with the relative path.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Good question. All right. If you come up with another question, feel free just to stop me in my tracks. But we will, if no one else has any other questions, we will dive into Lab 8. Because as you know, in Lab 6, we kind of insert our new Harry Potter people. And we tell them that they're going to rent some movies. We inserted some new movies too. And then we created a price table that's going to hold all of our prices. And then in Lab 7, we get all the data we need to store those prices. And in fact, we actually query all the data that we need to have our price table. And you can actually see the outcome here. You know, we have all of our movies and how many days they're rented and the different price types and when we charge for those prices. So, you know, we can say, oh, item 10, and I don't know if this item, whatever the item ID is, we, you know, charge $3 for a one-day rental from the 15th of May, 1998 to the 14th of June, 1998. That's what the price table is going to hold. It's going to hold all of our prices, whether they're active or historical. And in Lab 7, we culminate, build up to the point to where we can pull all that data. And that's where we should be with Lab 7 at the very end. You should be to where you have this select statement that queries all of that data for us. And now what we're going to do in Lab 8 is we are going to actually insert that data. So let me get those instructions pulled up here. Lab 8, right there. All right, so, and like I said, Lab 8 is actually the easiest lab of these three. And I think that it's actually convenient. I don't know if it was planned that way or not. It's very convenient because most of the time, if you have problems, this is kind of where they really manifest. And because this is kind of where we take all these little pieces that we've worked on and we have to connect them all and bring them all together. But so it's really nice that this lab's pretty lightweight because it gives you time to fix errors. And just so you know, lab 6, 7, and 8, I'm not going to do any docking for late on labs 6, 7. Basically, as long as you've been working on it, I want you to, if they are all turned in together with lab 8, it's going to be fine. So, if you've had any issues, and the reason I do that is because, as you've seen, there have been issues. You find issues after week 7 and you have to fix them in week 6 and so on and so forth. So, the whole idea is that we will be making some iterations. I expect some iterations, and that's completely fine. So don't get discouraged. It's not like you're really behind, I guess is what I'm trying to say, is because these labs are all kind of one big thing. But we do want to segment them so we don't get lost and confused, hopefully, for the most part. And for the most part, you've done a lot of the work. Just like in this case, that big query you wrote in step 7 is a lot of work. And now in lab 8, it's going to make step 1 super, super easy. So what we're going to do here is we are going to, step 1, we're going to use the query we developed in step 4 of lab 7. Wow, that's a tongue twister. And we're going to add a few columns so we can insert directly into the price table. And it kind of tells you what ones to add here. And we're going to go over that just a little bit. But for now, I kind of want to just show you how quick this lab's going to be. So basically what we do is we take our query, we just add a little shell to it, add a couple columns, and we run it. So it's actually super, super easy. And in fact, he gives you the shell for you. So you actually don't even have to hardly do anything, because basically you can almost just copy and paste your, in fact, you should be able to copy and paste your whole thing here. The only thing you might have to add if you don't have them is your who audit columns, but it should be there. So you can just copy and paste your lab in there and step 1's done. So it's going to be nice and easy, and you should end up with a result like this. And we're going to go over that in more detail here in just a second. And then on step 2, we're going to add a not null constraint to the price type of the price table, because now that we have all of our data in there, now we can make it not null. So that one should be pretty easy. We've added not null constraints before in the past, so if you have any questions, just you can Google it. Should be pretty simple, or you can look at a previous lab. All right, and then step 3 is another one of those freebies, really. But this one actually has an error. So this is the code for solving step 3. Now there is an issue with this, and it talks about it. So it says the following query should update the rental item price column for the 13 rows in the rental item table. Because again, just like in lab 7, we have all these rows in rental item. And now that we have price, we want to update all those rows so they actually have the price. And so this will do that for us, but there's an issue. And it says it should return values of 1, 3, 5, 10, and 15 for the prices. But it says, like the other DML statements, this contains a couple of errors. You need to fix it before completing this step, and you can find the missing components in the diagnostic query below the update statement. I'm going to give you a big hint here. Basically, and I kind of want to just talk through this, because what we're doing is we're kind of using that same logic again in a way. But basically what we're doing is we're going to take every possible rental and every possible rental type and rental item. So we take, in fact, so we're updating rental item, and we're setting the rental item price equal to the amount from price, but we're going to take price and join it with common lookup, CL1, where price type is equal to the common lookup ID, because we have that, right? And that gives us our 1, 3, and 5, 10, and 15, or 1, 3, and 5 for our price for the number of days. And then we're going to multiply that because we have our cross join. So we're going to take that 1, 3, and 5. We're going to get every possible rental and every possible common lookup ID, essentially. So basically, we get our prices, our price type, which is 1, 3, and 5, and we take that. Because now what we have is we have every rental, and we have every possible combination of 1, 3, and 5. And then what we're going to do is we want to filter it down, and we want to find it where the item ID and price and rental item is the same, obviously. We want this movie to equal that movie. And then we match our rental between rental item and rental. We want to make sure that it's the same rental. And then we get our rental item type is equal, because we already updated that one. That one should be our 1, 3, and 5. So we take that and we match it up with our common lookup and our common lookup code. That kind of ties it all together. And then to finish it all off, we want to make sure that the checkout date, because like I said, for like Hunt for the Red October, it'll actually have 2 prices depending on when you rented the movie. If you rented it within 30 days of it coming out, you paid more versus than what you would pay now. So we know our price table has our start date and end date. And so if you wanted to know how much a customer would pay, you would say, oh, let's look where the rental date is between the start date and end date of the price. So what we do here is that we say, oh, when they checked out, what was the price or, at that time. So we say where checkout date is between the start date and the end date. But there is a problem, because all of our old movies, if I said pick a number between 1 and nothing, you would have a little bit of a problem, because it's not 1 and infinity, it's 1 and nothing. So a little hint on this one is that all of our price end dates are not necessarily have a value. And so what we can do is we can add a little is null statement to simulate a value. And if we were going to simulate one, we could say something like tomorrow or something similar. And so that's what we're going to do there. Is all you have to do is put this in a little function to handle that not null statement. And I believe somewhere, maybe it was in a previous lab, it talks about handling a not null statement, or maybe it's in the help section of this. Let's take a look. Nope. It might have been in a previous lab if I'm thinking. But I'm going to real quick search for this so we can find it. Let's take a look here. Sql Functions. All right. So here is a good one to look at. Basically, the null value function will evaluate a value. So in this case, our price.endDate, and we can exchange it for something else. And so we would want to exchange our null value to be a date that's in the future, essentially. So you can kind of put whatever it is. Because if it's null, it's infinity, right? Like if I wanted to rent Hunt for the Red October, it would be whatever day it was. It would have been in 98 sometime, so a while ago. So we would say where the checkout date, which is today, is between 1998 and tomorrow, which would then make our price accurate. So just to show you, let's see if we can find a quick example. Let's just, we can write it real quick. Let's grab that script. Grab that, let's paste it in here. And null value, we want to make sure we fill that in. And we can say something like trunk sysdate +1. Something like that, because that would make it tomorrow. So you just got to handle that null value. All right, and then so that step should be pretty much a freebie, and then step 4, and I guess I'll talk about this. So this is the detailed problem solving. This is a really nice thing. So it will turn out this after you do this. It'll tell you all the prices. You want to check this. Now, this is where, depending on what you rented the Potters, you might have some different prices here. So if you rented Harry 2 new movies or 2 old movies, that's fine. As long as you make sure that you have this working, your numbers may not match entirely for the Potters, and that's okay. Because they did rent different movies. You'll notice that Harry has 2 movies. Specifically, you were supposed to rent him a new movie and an old movie. I noticed that some people didn't, and that's fine. But so mine will this will show a 1 and a 3 for the price. But as long as you're getting the correct values for whatever you put, that's fine. If you're not getting the correct values, you can use this detailed problem solving step. And this will be just a bunch of queries you can run that will help you pull different values. So like this first one, all it does is it pulls their member and contact, telephone, and address information. And what this one does is it just makes sure that we have the correct Potter stuff. And it kind of tells you can verify the correct customers are configured, right? And then the second one says you can verify the correct rental and rental items are configured. And, we can see that Harry Potter has a single rental. So he walked in the store once, but he rented 2 movies. And Ginny and Lily both rented 1. So you can test that with that one. That tests the rental and rental item. And then the last one confirms that you have the correct price type and rental item type stuff here. And it says the most common error occurs when you insert the wrong start date in the price table. And I would hope no one missed this because we kind of did it together. So, but if you did this, now one of the biggest things, people get really scared because most people run this to check. And on this one, most of the time you get stuff, but if everything's right, you actually won't get any results here. So if you run this query and get nothing, that's actually good because this is actually checking to see if your end date, your start date is after your checkout date, stuff like that. So, so if you get roles, so it says you made the mistake if the start date occurs after the rental start date, like the following rows. So if you get rows here, then you have a problem. If you don't, then you're good. So a lot of people will message me and be like, hey, I didn't get any results on this query. Can you tell me what's wrong? Well, nothing's wrong. You're not supposed to get any results on that query if everything's right. That will actually find the problem rows. So as long as everything's going right, you actually can skip this whole detailed problem solving. You don't need to run these queries unless you're not getting the results you see right here. If you're getting these, then you're good. You can skip right to step 4. And step 4 is another easy one. You add a not null constraint to the rental item price column of the rental item table. So lab 8 is really quite simple. 2 of the steps basically give you the code. One, you have to add one function in. And the first one, which we're going to talk about here in just a second, you actually just have to paste your query in here, which should be pretty simple. But I did want to talk a little bit about that step. So let's go take a look here. Let's open our lab 7. All right, so here is lab 7. Oh wait, no, we need lab 8. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about lab 8, not lab 7. Lab 8, there we are. All right, so if we want to insert into lab 8, we use our, and I kind of cheat just a little bit. So let's use their little, let's use the one here. So this is my select statement, or we'll use the one from lab 7, so that way it matches perfect. So if it were me, I'm getting ready to do my step 1, I would take and copy what he gives you off the website, which will give you this nice little thing right here. And then all we have to do is go to our lab 7, and we're going to go to the last step, and we are going to take our select statement. We don't care about the columns, just select statement. And we are actually just going to paste it right in here. And you'll notice it says implement lab logic from lab 7. If you want, you can copy and paste the individual pieces, but I'm actually just going to take and paste it right in there. Now we won't need the semicolon, so you can delete that. And then what we want to make sure, because depending on what you put in your select statement, the one thing we got to make sure is that we match up here. So I pull the item ID, active flag, common lookup ID as price type. You want to make sure that this matches this, because we give these kind of their own little names. And then price description doesn't look like we need up here. But there is one thing missing from mine. So you'll notice that let's actually save this and let's try to run it. If I were to run try to run this, I would actually get an error. And I should have went to the actual, let's exit. Let's actually go into lab 8. And let's run it again. So that way we get our log file inside of our lab 8 folder. And let's see here. And apparently that's not one of them. So let's open up our lab 8. Right there. So if we take a look at this, you notice that we get this invalid identifier. And that line 23 is referring to these guys right here. And so all I need to do to fix that is add those columns in my initial select statement. So I can just say, kind of like what we talked about before. But the important thing is we need to tell it what it's looking for. So we need to say created by, because it wouldn't work just putting it in there because it's a subquery. And so it's going to be looking for it. So in this case, we actually need to put out what it is in the as clause. Last updated by and as last update date. Save that. Come over here. Give it another run. Reload. So now when we look up, we get this sequence doesn't exist, and that's probably because I probably deleted something somewhere along the line. So let's look at our lab 8, and we know that it's price S1, not price S. That might be a typo, actually. Yeah, that's actually a typo in the instructions there. So make sure your sequence matches. It's essentially what that's doing. And then let's see how we did this time. Okay, and it looks like we're still getting one error. It says last update date, identifier not found. And let's check. So we're going to describe price, because maybe I just, see, and I have last updated. And so we want to make sure those match. Now that might not be the same for you as it is for me. It might just be that I typoed that. But just, troubleshooting, that's what it comes down to, is, because it's saying that it doesn't exist. So we check to see if it exists. And now let's see if we made her work. Oh, and then I have to change it here as well. Last updated date. And so hopefully, I don't know if that's my bad thing. I'm guessing it's my bad. It looks like, yeah. So Jordan said that normally yours should work there. So
A
that,
little further down, so after your from, then your select statement, it says end as amount. This is in the instructions. And then right underneath that, it says subquery as created by, truncated current date as creation date. So there's 4 things we need to add there that we didn't add last week.
let's, where's this at? Let me hurry in.
So you've got your, 1 second.
Let me actually really quick, I'll put a,
So you got select price, S1, and then underneath that you've got from, and then another select statement.
yes.
And then if you keep going down, you eventually get to where it says end as amount.
And as oh, yep. Okay.
Right under end as amount, if you go back to the instructions, it's got 4 things right there that they're adding.
Oh, yeah. So that is the,
It's your created by, creation date, last
Yep.
updated by, and last updated date.
yep. And so you can put those really anywhere. Order doesn't matter. But if you want it to kind of match like the, match the format of the price table, you could put them there.
Oh, gotcha. I see what you're saying.
Yep. And because it's a subquery, because we're selecting from what we select and then we actually insert. So because we're selecting it, this step right here kind of puts it all in order for us, because it basically we have all the data here. And so this step is selecting from our little temp table and it puts it all in order for us. And then it puts it here. So if you want it to match, like, because we could take and run this query. In fact, let's try it. We could take and run this. And we should get the exact kind of output. And it looks like I'm missing this something somewhere. Is it a comma? Anyways,
I think
we
you
should
have an
get the,
extra closing parentheses. I think.
let's take, oh yeah, I believe you are right, because there shouldn't be an order by there at all, closing parenthesis on the subquery there at all. So let's take that. Let's give that a shot there. There we go. So now what we should see is an exact, almost copy of the price table. The only difference is that we don't have the actual price ID, because we add that right here. So our query should pull, at this point, it should even pull the last updated by and created by and all that kind of fun stuff. And then we're ready to insert. And then we take this and then we put it up into here. And if I match how I goof mine up, then we should be able to run this whole thing. And then you'll notice once we're done and it all works, we get this 135 rows created. So as long as you create your price table correct, unlike I have, because I mistyped these column names, so I had to adjust a few things. But as long as you type your price table right, you should be good. Probably would have been easier just to go back and fix it and when I made it, but whatever. But anyway, so basically you're just taking your lab 7, you're going to paste it in there, and like we talked about, you're going to just add your who audit columns in there, and you should be good to go. Does anyone have any questions about that one? Sorry, I got a little messy there with my little boo-boo, but once you get your query written, it's just a matter of basically we just want to make sure that we select all the columns that are listed here. And by default, we have item, price type, active flag, start date, end date, and amount. So we just need to add created by, creation date, last updated by, and last update date to that, because we add price type here. So basically, you just like we did, you should just have to come here and build your little who audit columns after amount or wherever for that matter, and you should be good on that. But that's lab 8 really. And at this point, mine should be about working. But I don't want to give too much away. So does anyone else have any questions about lab 8? Or lab 6 or 7 for that matter? Alrighty. Well then, I guess because this is week 8, this is a time to really get everything cleaned up. So if you're not done with lab 6 or 7, I would highly suggest you start wherever you're stuck, because we need lab 6 to work before lab 7 will work, before lab 8 will work. And I'm hoping that at this point, most people are getting pretty clean with lab 6. If you're still working a little bit on lab 7 or 6 for that matter, don't feel like you're terribly behind, because lab 8 really is expecting you to have to go back and maybe fix some things in those. And it does get easier as you go along, and so hopefully we tie up all these seams, get them all put together. But if you have any questions, feel free to shoot me a message on Teams, and we should be able to keep trucking along. So if you have any questions, stick around. Otherwise, have a great week, and thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.